Hey everybody, buongiorno. This is Kevin. I'm talking to you from Italy, Texas, which is the home of almost nothing. I'm here with my great buddy Steve Wells, who's not in Italy, Texas. He's in Denver, Colorado. Hey, Steve.
Hi, Kevin. Hi, everyone. Great to have you all here with us tonight. We're glad to have you join us.
Very blessed, absolutely. So this is a recap video of our last meetup session last week, actually, in which we talked about the feminine rising. And it's very appropriate subject with regard to the keys to the shift. It's a huge subject, actually, one that probably could take us a long time to finally get through every aspect of it. But in the meetup last week, essentially what we did was we posed a number of questions to the group. Steve and I then went through an outline of topics talking about the feminine rising, and then reintroduced the questions at the end of the meetup session. And there was a discussion that was held in which we talked about answers to each of these questions. So it was really great. And so what we wanted to do first off, it was to talk about the bullet points that we brought up in the meetup itself. And so, Steve, why don't you start off and bring up some of those points?
Yeah, so these are high level. We went into detailed discussion on each of these, but just so you have an idea of the things that we talked about, started out with our genderless identity and how in spirit we aren't masculine, or we aren't male or female, but have masculine and feminine components. Then we talked about why is feminine rising? What is this all about, and how is it related to the shift? Following that, we talked about cultures and how in previous times, previous epochs, previous centuries, the balance of masculine and feminine has been different. So even though for most of our recorded history, masculine has been dominant, there have been times in the past in certain cultures where feminine has been. And so we spent some time talking about that. We talked about our society and the way it is structured currently and has been for the past number of centuries in a patriarchal structure where the masculine is dominant in the various religion and science, technology, politics, business, all these basic areas of our current culture seem to have a male dominance to them. And it's throughout our entire culture. So we talked about that for a while. We talked about how, not in just particular cultures, but it's been throughout epochs that there's been a swing from masculine to feminine and back to masculine. And so there's kind of a cyclic tendency towards it. We spent some time talking about that. We talked about feminine movements in recent past, the ERA, the hippie movement, Me Too, obviously, is in our face and very to the point right now. And the gay and lesbian subjects that are coming up are all part of this feminine rising. At least that's the way we see it, and we spent some time discussing that. Following that, we talked about the characteristics of masculine and feminine energy. Feminine energy tends to be very intuitive and quote, curvy in the energy, whereas masculine energy tends to be very assertive and strong and disciplined and orderly and angular, and discussed that basic difference in the energy between masculine and feminine, which we all agreed is not necessarily restrictive to male and female. We all, whether we're male and female, have both aspects to us. And that at that point in time, we went on to, I'll let you take it from there, Kevin.
Sure. So one of the things that was discussed was what women need to do to help move this sort of feminine rising movement forward. And we talked about the idea that women need to sort of take control of the power that has been given to them, which is very unique, and a lot of women don't feel ready to be able to assert their power that they've been given in moving this forward. And men, on the other hand, need to what they need to do in terms of stepping aside and allowing this movement to happen. And so we spent a long time talking about that, as those two different aspects. We then moved on to our personal experiences with sort of the feminine aspects of our beings, and the fact that Steve and I are pretty much in touch with the feminine aspects of our existence. But one issue that we brought up to the group was something that Steve and I have been discussing for a while now, and especially with the Me Too movement and the fact that women are very sensitive to the male physical dominance issue, and that is that we're very touchy-feely people, and we don't know if maybe it's necessarily inappropriate for us to be so touchy-feely at this particular time in the evolution of the soul, as we're talking about the shift. And so we posed this to the group and asked them, is this something that we need to be concerned about, or that we need to reel in and make a change in order to help the movement forward? And the general response was that as long as we're being intuitive with the people that we're actually touching, and that we are sensitive to any feedback that we're getting, that the person might not be receptive to that, then it's probably appropriate. And we were happy to hear that, but this was a relatively small group, and from a statistical standpoint, that's a small population. And so we'd like to hear from other people as well as to whether or not it's appropriate or inappropriate. And Steve and I definitely are going to listen to responses with open ears on that particular subject. We also talked a little bit about difficulties in the process of the feminine rising. We didn't get to talk about it as much as we wanted to, because we actually started running out of time. But the fact that the big deal was that male energy is not going to go away without some kicking and screaming from the male standpoint. And so there needs to be an understanding, I guess, of how best to move these old energy males into the new domain that we're talking about. And that's definitely a topic that's going to bring up some discussion probably in the future as well. So that basically concluded our discussion in the meetup itself. We then reposed the questions to the group, and we had some discussion on that. But we found that we ran out of time. It's such a huge subject, and there was just no way in a 2-hour session that we were going to be able to cover everything. And so as a group, we decided that in the next meetup session, we were actually going to talk about this subject again. And we were, the suggestion was made that we kind of make it a feminine type of meetup, as opposed to a masculine reading from a list type meetup. And I think Steve and I are both looking forward to running that meetup session in that particular way. And so we've got some people that want to bring certain experiences into the group. We've got someone who wants to do tarot readings with feminine rising tarot cards, doing a meditation on feminine rising, and having a more sort of open general discussion on this particular topic, as well as bringing up these questions again, which will lead to more discussion on it. There was more discussion on this topic than we've ever had on any topic we've had in a meetup. And I think the group in general wants to flesh out more of these topics. Right, Steve?
Right, and actually I think there was someone that even said they wanted to do a meditation on feminine rising. And so we welcome these other contributions and other perspectives and other activities and conversation points that Kevin and I hadn't really thought of for the meetup. But as far as the Facebook page, we'd also love to hear what you all have to say about these things. And we're going to read off these questions that we're going to be reading off at the next meetup. for conversation, but also we'd love to hear from you folks on the Facebook site as well as to your experiences and how you would respond to these questions, as well as to the subject that Kevin mentioned about what are appropriate boundaries for men with regards to women in terms of casual and friendly touch. So anyone that has some contributions to that, we'd love to hear it. So with that, Kevin, maybe we should go through this list of questions. There are not a whole lot. I think we got about 6 or 7.
Sure.
Go with the first one, and we'll alternate.
Okay. Well, the first one was, what experiences have you had where you've been called to step forward and assert your female rights, where in the past you would have just remained quiet?
Yeah, good question. What challenges have you faced in supporting and encouraging feminine equality?
I'll bet you there have been a lot of those, Steve, and I'd be interested to hear that, because we don't often get much feedback from our friends and family on in terms of that particular question.
Right. Also, I'd just like to add that we'd love to hear from men. We frequently hear from women. A lot of these questions, I'm expecting we'll get some feedback from women, but rarely from men. So if there are any men that would like to throw in their 2 cents, regardless of what it is, we'd love to hear it.
Yeah, sometimes we feel like we're in a rowboat by ourselves in the middle of an ocean, Steve, because so much of the group tends to be feminine in nature, females in nature. And so, yeah, definitely get some men perspective on this would be so helpful, not only for us as guys, but also for the women as well, because they're just basically hearing from 2 guys that have the exact same perspective on things for the most part.
Right.
So the next question is, what could you, being women, do to help men adapt to the new rules of masculine feminine equality? Help us help you, in other words. What can you do to help us embrace these things? Steve.
Right. Yeah, and then by the converse token, what could you men, in other words, do to help women adapt to these new rules? So what can we do to help each other from our perspectives? We're all wanting to accomplish the same thing, which is to bring, at least that's what we're aiming at. These are the people that we hope to be speaking to, as people that want to do this. And so what can we, as either men or women, to do the opposite gender to help them to adapt to this?
Yeah, those are great questions, Steve. And I have to hand it to you to in bringing those questions up, because really that's the meat of it. That's the meat of it, because we all need to work together to get this feminine rising movement working faster. The faster the better, in my opinion, and I think in yours as well. So another question is, can we drop our gender identification long enough to remember that we're all genderless spirit beings, meaning we don't have any feminine or masculine up in the spirit world, but yet we have those things when we're playing the game as a human being, and we have genders as human beings. So do we have the ability essentially to put that aside at all and realize that gender is just a game, and that we're really all one, and we're all really genderless up in the spirit world? So good. That's a good question too, Steve. What else?
Okay, and can we identify both the masculine and the feminine tendencies and characteristics within ourselves as well as within others?
Yeah, and we're pretty good at seeing it in other people, but it's sometimes hard to identify those things in ourselves, right, Steve?
Yeah. Yeah, which leads us to the next question, which is kind of a tag on to it.
Okay. Have we ever known women who exude a masculine trait and men who exude feminine traits? And I think the answer is going to be yes, we have, and to different extents, because we all have both of those aspects incorporated into our role as human beings, but to different levels. And so in some people, it's definitely easier to see one trait as opposed to another trait. So that's a good question.
And I think it does tend to be a little easier to see it in others than it is in ourselves. Trying to delineate between what are masculine and feminine characteristics of our own can be challenging, but it's an interesting question to ask.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, good one. And so, Steve, what's our last question that we posed?
Are the LGBT issues that are coming out in society today, which we see a lot of, the result of this feminine rising and of the shift? I mean, I think that Kevin and I would both say, without question, yes, but how so might be the better question is, how is it part of that?
Yeah, and you know what, Steve? One thing that sort of comes to mind, and I didn't mention this in the group last week, but it is something that came to mind after we dispersed. Is sort of the stereotype of the gay man, the best the best stereotype for what men should be in this feminine rising. In other words, someone who's emotionally available, who's easily expresses their emotions. Those are certainly a couple things that, especially in the stereotype of the gay male, we see in movies and in television. Is that a stereotype that helps in terms of this movement forward in the with the rising of the feminine? I'd be interested in knowing what people think about that. I'd be interested in knowing how you feel about that, Steve.
Yeah, well, so that's a good question, and I think it also can be posed on the opposite side. There are certain stereotypes of lesbian women that perhaps need to be broken open and dispelled with to truly understand what's behind what's happening with this feminine rising and how is it being expressed through the lesbian and gay experience and how that's coming out in society.
Yeah, and the transgender as well. So certainly, yeah, something to discuss down the road. Well, Steve, that's basically it for the recap and also a little bit of preview for what's coming up in the next meetup. And I'm really looking forward to it. This is something that we could probably have meetups for. We could probably have a meetup group that just talks about Rise of the Feminine that probably would go on for 2 years. But I'm looking forward to at least this next one and getting more of an idea of what the rest of the group feels in terms of their response to these questions. And like Steve said, please give some thought to giving us your response to some of these questions. I know that it's going to bring up some thought-provoking responses. Please feel free to share those responses because it leads to further discussion and further understanding, especially of Steve and my's point of view, of being males who want this feminine rising to happen sooner rather than later.
Very good. Yes. So thank you all for listening tonight to our recap and our preview. And those of you on the Facebook page, we would love to hear what your thoughts are. And we're looking very much forward to hearing the thoughts of the people in the meetup in this next July meetup.
Absolutely. Hey, Steve, I just want to say I love you. I think as guys, we don't say that enough to other guys. But I also want to tell everyone out there that I love you too, and I look forward to just continuing to be a part of your journey.
Thank you, Kevin. I love you too, and of course, we both love all of you out there. We try and spread that and to share that with all of you. That's part of why we do this, because it makes us feel good to do so. So thank you for being a part of it. We look forward to connecting with you again at the earliest opportunity. So we'll see you soon.
Sounds good. Bye, everyone.